The Alberta government has released its new restructured energy market rules, and the ones that govern the power sector in Alberta and determine your electricity prices. And I'm afraid the news is not very good, at least according to Jason Wang, who's a senior analyst at the Pembina Institute. And we're going to get his take on those new rules. So, welcome to the interview, Jason.
Yeah. Glad to be here again, Markham.
Look, we've talked about this in previous interviews that these changes were coming, and this is not unusual because all across North America, jurisdictions are changing their generation mix. We're seeing a lot more wind and solar, and they're changing their market rules in order to accommodate those. There's other new technologies like storage, from batteries. And this Alberta seems to be going backwards. Could you explain, how the market works very briefly, how the market works and what the changes mean?
Just to be clear, do you mean the current market or
Yes, the current
changes
market
that they're
and what the new
proposing?
rules are.
Yeah, so Alberta has what's called a deregulated energy only market. And this is one where primarily all forms of generation compete together. And they all say, here's how much electricity I can produce, and here's the cost that it'll be. The system operator then goes through the list of bids from each of these generators and picks the lowest cost ones and picks as much as is needed to meet demand at any given moment. And that's how costs are supposed to be kept as low as possible. Um, I mean, that's a simplification, but that's essentially been the basis of Alberta's electricity market and many other markets around the world for many years. Um, in Alberta, just in particular too, it's important to know that prior to these changes, we've had what's called a uniform price. So one price across the whole province. And one of the things that is changing now is that. So depending on where you are in the province, once these new rules are implemented in mid-2027, generators may be exposed to slightly different price than other generators in a different part of the province. The main reason or justification for taking this sort of approach is actually a valid one that just recognizes how there are different resource availabilities in different parts of the province, right? There's different levels of infrastructure available to connect generation to demand where it's needed. Um, Alberta is calling this a locational marginal price. Is essentially is what's going to happen. Like the province is going to be split up into some submarkets, basically by region, and at any given moment, these regions will see a different electricity price on the generation side.
Okay, what other kind of changes have they made to the market?
A few others are related to what are called reliability products. So some of these existed before, but as you said, generation mixes are changing. We are seeing more solar and wind be implemented and onto the grid. And there are many different ways to deal with that. And Alberta has introduced a new payment, essentially a new submarket that essentially rewards energy storage and gas power plants like peaker power plants for being able to fill in any gaps that might have been unexpected. So maybe that could apply in the future too to other sorts of products. Not exactly like synchronous condensers for reliability, frequency modulation, but I think just a minor important thing to say is these sets of changes, they do bring about some good things. Locational marginal pricing, like I said, is something that is used in other places around the world and could be good for storage, actually. It could be good for consumers too. Like many of the announcements that we've seen in the last couple of years in Alberta, there is an element to which it could be positive, but a major concern we have at the Pembina Institute right now is how they're being implemented.
How are they being implemented?
Yeah, partly some of them we don't know. um, just with locational marginal pricing in particular, one of the main things we're concerned about is this going to be implemented immediately? Um, if so, at you know at their full strength, there are projects in southern there are projects in southeast Alberta, near Medicine Hat, near Lethbridge, that might immediately be negative in cash flow, actually, because they're going to be penalized due to how many projects there are in that area. And that's actually unfortunate because the reason there are so many projects there is the resource is great, but infrastructure hasn't kept up. We don't have enough transmission capacity to bring um, electrons to the grid from generators in that region. And most of that is the Alberta Electric System Operator and the government of Alberta's fault, because in the past they've been extremely pessimistic with how much generation would actually be built. And most of this has been wind and solar, to be clear. There are some gas plants being built in that area too, but the I think at Pembina Institute, certainly we saw there was tremendous interest in development in that area. The government disagreed. Generation actually did turn up, and now we're left in a situation where there's congestion in the system, and these generators are going to be penalized for it. And to be clear, that's existing generation too. It's quite worrisome that some of those projects might have to shut down, might have to sell off to the lowest bidder. We're not exactly sure what's going to happen and what those implications will be, but certainly it's not a good one for the electricity grid or good for rates.
Okay, so I think it's fair to say that the changes favor gas power plants, and that comes as no surprise to us, I guess, because the Premier Danielle Smith has said many times Alberta's a gas province and she favors gas, and the government has in the past put on a renewables moratorium in 2023. I mean, this is a ground we've covered in previous interviews, but so the price might go up. That's a concern of yours for consumers. But here's one that I really am I'm kind of puzzled by, and that is bypassing regulatory oversight and not having
Mm.
the rules bypassing basically the Alberta Utilities Commission. That seems quite unusual.
Yeah, exactly. That's another major concern we have with how this is being implemented. Um, the and there are quite a few to be clear, but um, yeah, the rules as they have been announced this week are going to go through one more set of deep consultations for writing out the regulations, essentially writing out the deep technical rules. But then, yeah, come mid 2027, the government has said they're going to implement this market. They're going to have an interim period where they'll review if any uh, design element is causing something unexpected, and that they'll adjust it. And then it'll go to the Alberta Utilities Commission for review. This is the opposite way to any other market changes that have happened. The purpose of the Alberta Utilities Commission as the regulator of utilities is to look at any proposed changes from the system operator, from utilities, from everybody, and say, is this in the public interest? And in this current process of redesigning the market, that's being put at the very end of the process. And that's certainly in our view and in other independent assessments going to be contrary to the interests of ratepayers. Folks are going to be paying more for their electricity under these new design rules, and partly because of how they favor gas generation, like you said. But there's just in general, it's unclear why this is the approach that's being taken, and it's probably going to introduce tremendous uncertainty for investors too.
Okay, so you talked about higher electricity prices, and you're estimating that they could be between 8 and 30%. 8% is enough of a hike, uh, but 30%, that seems quite unusual.
Yeah, that's not our analysis, actually, Markham. That's analysis conducted by the electric system operators, consultants, E3, and from another group who participated in the market redesign consultations. The consultations were good in that sense that there was a lot of discussion, there was some transparency, there was some analysis done, but the latest rounds of analyses that are basically the same as the final version of the rules, or they're based on essentially the same set of rules, are showing exactly like you said, almost from immediately after implementation throughout the 2040s, rate increases in that range, depending on which scenarios or which exact model that you look at. But yeah, the system operators consultants are the ones who are seeing rate increases of upwards of 30%, a bit more for some years, a bit less, but overall, on average, it looks like that much almost immediately and in perpetuity.
Let's talk about the last thing that really struck me about this, and that is missed opportunities for grid modernization. I mean, you talk about things that could have been done, like more battery storage, demand side management, which is where when there's a spike in electricity demand, then residences, maybe businesses are asked to cut back on their electricity consumption. Interprovincial interties. I mean, the one with BC isn't even running at anywhere close to full capacity. So there's lots of room in there for change. I see this as a major issue because all over, everywhere where I talk to, Asia, Europe, United States, everybody is modernizing their grid. That's a major, major issue because you you can do so much more these days with the grid you have if you introduce things like grid forming inverters and digital controls and you reconductors so that you get higher capacity out of you, on and on and on. I mean, I keep hearing about these things that are going on in other jurisdictions, and Alberta seems to be shutting it down, is doing the exact opposite. That makes no sense.
Alberta, you know, that is a frustrating element of the electricity system at the moment. There are, small examples of these technologies being implemented, but for example, dynamic line ratings. There's finally a project going ahead. There have been some pilots, but now there's a project going ahead. Um, the electric system operator CEO during the announcement yesterday talked about how this market redesign happened so quickly. It was conducted over the course of just 2 years rather than some jurisdictions taking 10 years. And he said this is actually something to be proud of because we can learn from others and their mistakes. But yeah, unfortunately, we're not learning from other places in terms of the opportunities. Just like you said, there are so many. Uh, the government knows about some of these. They've talked about them like interties. We just haven't seen any action. The Utilities Commission on demand side management, again, they're starting to ask some of the right questions. One thing I was just reminded of yesterday is they are striking now a time of use working group, but in our view at Pembina Institute, time of use it's far from enough. It's not the way that everybody else in the world is thinking about demand side management anymore. That was like an approach that we could take before we discovered the internet, before we could have devices that talk to each other. But even despite that, the Utilities Commission in their position paper for time of use rates recognized that there's at least a 12-to-1 benefit to cost ratio to implement demand side management, right? So again, those are not Pembina's numbers. Those are not from industries. That's from the Alberta Utilities Commission itself, whose again main interest is to protect Albertans and ratepayers and minimize costs in the system. So, we're hopeful that uh, Alberta will um, start to put the pieces of the puzzle together and realize that there are many other opportunities we're missing out on. But the market restructure in what we saw from that, it doesn't go far enough. Like I said, with batteries, it's good for batteries. Negative pricing that might be implemented between 2027 and 2032. That's also potentially a good thing for storage and for the system overall, but and for demand side management. But yeah, it's nowhere near the level of innovation that's happening in other places, including Ontario, just a couple of provinces over in our same country.
So just to wrap up, we've got a restructured energy market rules that favor gas plants and hobble renewable energy. We've got anticipated electricity price hikes between 8% and 30%, according to the government's own consultants. We've got the Alberta Utilities Commission, which is the regulator designed to protect the public interest, now comes at the end of the process instead of where it should be at the beginning. So how is it going to protect the public interest? Because, the horse is already out of the barn. All the opportunities for grid modernization that exist that are being used by other jurisdictions, most of them are being ignored. And
Mhm.
the renewable, I mean, this sounds like an utter disaster. Or what it sounds like is Alberta is roaring into the 20th century. Everybody else is
Yeah.
getting on with 21st century changes, and Alberta is choosing to stay in the 20th century. Well, Jason, thank
Yeah.
you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Markham, as always.